ape to man image. Everybody's seen it on a TV show, a t-shirt, you name it.
Yep, the most iconic evolutionary image known is a fraud. This week on Creation Magazine Live.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name is Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Calvin Smith.
Now, our topic this week on Creation Magazine Live it has to do with probably the most popular, iconic, evolutionary image that people know. You know this one.
Yeah.
It's the famous Ape to Man series of drawings that we commonly see. We're going to review one of the most published modern pictorial icons of evolution and show that it is fraudulent based on known inaccuracies and false information.
Yeah, I mean, we see this all the time, right? More and more t-shirts, coffee mugs, kids shows. It's so iconic now that it's used for comedic purposes. Like the famous one showing the last guy, hunched over his computer, like that's the last stage of evolution.
Right.
Of course, you can find a picture like that pretty well promoting any sport or activity, like the last guy or gal in the picture. They'll be playing golf or cricket or whatever. Someone's trying to promote, it's as the best or most evolved. And
right, yeah. Now, many people don't seem to understand that this popular image has racist roots and it's really an extension of the once common, often distorted comparisons found in both scientific publications and popular literature of apes and African and Caucasian heads.
That's right. This idea got started when Darwin suggested an unbroken evolutionary chain of life from simple molecules to humans. And so this chain analogy gave birth to the idea of supposed missing links in the chain, an analogy still used today. Unfortunately for evolutionists, instead of a chain, what the fossil record actually shows is many groups of life forms with large gaps or holes in the supposed chain between the two of them.
Right, and regardless, this so-called great chain of being is still presented as fact, and evolutionists still believe that given enough time, more fossil discoveries are all that's needed to locate the many missing links, so-called, that they think must exist. Now, we did a show on the so-called transitional fossils or missing links way back in season 2, episode 22. And for those of you who want an in-depth look at the variety of so-called missing links, but what we want to concentrate on today is the so-called chain from ape to man that is so often portrayed in that famous image.
So missing link claims have come and gone, but that idea seems to be, that they're there or were there, and we just need to keep looking through, some more rocks. We're going to find the evidence of them. Now, as prized missing links like Lucy or Tiktaalik kind of come along, they have a big bunch of hype, and then they kind of quietly fall off the wagon as even evolutionists abandon them.
Right.
Every now and then, a new missing link discovery claim is made, and of course, this just reinforces this belief.
Right. Yeah. Now, this progression chain, as we've said, seen everywhere from book covers to magazine articles to cartoons, is a drawing depicting part of this chain, namely human evolution from primitive, stooping, ape-like creature progressing to a modern human. The progression is usually pictured in 4 to 6 steps, but sometimes as many as 30 are shown. But you might be wondering, where did the picture idea come from originally?
Right.
Let's talk about that.
One of the earliest examples of the chain was completed by Brooklyn College paleontologist Eric Slakecher. His rendition shows 30 links from fish to amphibians, reptiles, mammals, primates, and at the top of the evolutionary progression, modern humans. And you can see that diagram on your screen there.
Well, the scenario pictured is a little different from what is proposed today, but it does include some animals still touted as evolutionary links, such as Samoria, the lizard-looking thing there in the diagram. It's also notable that the common ancestor of humans is a modern ape, not an ape-like ancestor, and the first human looks pretty much like modern man.
Right.
A clear gap is shown to exist between apes and humans. And really, you could line up today's living animals and produce a diagram very close to this one.
That's right. So when we get back, we're going to reveal where the first ape-to-man image first appeared and go into more details.
Every time I hear of Neanderthal man, I can't help but feel sorry for the poor guy. Initially reconstructed to look like some apish brute, it took 44 years before a reanalysis of the fossils revealed that Neanderthal man's anatomy was very similar to yours and mine. Neanderthals buried their dead, which isn't the sort of behaviour you'd expect from an animal. What's more, discovery of ornaments, tools and stone-tipped spears reveal a high level of sophistication. Neanderthals made their own superglue from pitch, and flute-like structures found with their remains suggest they enjoyed music. But what did Neanderthal man really look like? In recent years, researchers have answered this question by using computerized reconstructions, commonly used in forensic science. These studies show that Neanderthal man looked remarkably similar to you and I. If he was dressed in a suit and walked past you in the street, you probably wouldn't notice him.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
If you just tuned in, this week we're talking about why the ape-to-man image that you see everywhere, the most iconic evolutionary image, is false.
Right. Now, the modern ape-to-man human progression, called The Ascent of Man, was first illustrated in a best-selling book titled Early Man, written by University of California Berkeley professor F. Clark Howell. And the progression was printed in a 91-centimeter fold-out on pages 41 to 45 in the 1965 edition and reprinted in both the 1968 and 1973 editions. So the original chart included 15 pictures that traced human evolution from Pliopithecus to Ramapithecus to Homo erectus, all the way to Cro-Magnon and ending with Homo sapiens.
Okay, now, and this parade of human evolution really captured people's imagination. It was a very simple pictorial snapshot type of image that quickly communicated the evolutionary concept. So it was great in that sense for evolutionists. And like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Creationist human origin researcher Martin Lubenow, author of the book Bones of Contention, concluded that the human progression image has been one of the most successful tools ever used to promote human evolution. It constituted powerful visual proof for human evolution that even a small child could grasp. It was a masterpiece of Madison Avenue promotion. That's the way he put it.
Interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
So this parade has been prominently displayed in social science classes, biology classrooms, school bulletin boards for decades now.
Yeah.
And because of its graphic power, it's been kind of etched into the minds of billions of people worldwide. Ironically, the progression was known to be fake when it was first published. The book that included it, after noting only that fragmentary fossil evidence existed for human evolution, openly admitted that the progression was drawn from largely manufactured or distorted evidence.
Oh dear,
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, in the author's own words, many of the figures shown here have been built up from a few fragments. A jaw, some teeth perhaps, and thus are products of educated guessing. Now, the author added that, even if later finds should dictate changes, that is, even if the drawings are wrong, these reconstructions serve a purpose in showing how these creatures might have looked. And the term might is in the original text, by the way.
Right. Which just emphasizes again that the origins debate is historical science. It's not operational science, right?
Yeah.
No scientist today has ever observed these creatures. Their guesses about what they might have been in the past, according to kind of an atheistic evolutionary philosophical idea. Not repeatable operational science done according to the scientific method. Now, below is each of the 15 illustrations here in this book was a discussion of each picture, something that's rarely ever included today when the progression is shown because of how popular it's become. But note right away in the diagram that from Africanus, the main change, aside from poor posture, is really only the head.
Right, and there are huge problems here. Neanderthals, even in 1970, weren't considered part of our evolutionary lineage. But actually another branch of the human family tree. Both modern humans and Neanderthals are today assumed to have evolved from Homo erectus. Lubenow stresses that not that more recent fossil discoveries have revealed that the progression was inaccurate. No, the truth is far worse. Now, what he's pointing out here is that these were false depictions and were known to be fraudulent.
They were known to be fraudulent at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few of these far worse examples he mentioned include the fact that the proto-apes pictured weren't bipedal, yet are shown in the illustrations as being expertly bipedal. The bipedal apes shown in the evolutionary progression are thought to have lived long before evolutionists believed bipedalism had even evolved. So the Howell text openly acknowledges this, admitting that although proto-apes and apes were quadrupedal, all are shown here standing for purposes of comparison.
Okay.
So they're showing stuff that they know isn't true.
Well, even that admission isn't accurate. Some of the creatures shown in the parade weren't even actually physically able to stand erect. Furthermore, although the text describes them as standing, they are in fact they're drawn walking. Some of them have one foot in the air, balancing on the other foot as they walk across the page. Mm-hmm. This gives them a far more human-like appearance than if they were just standing. Now, accurate comparisons would require showing their actual normal quadrupedal or knuckle walking gait.
Right.
On four, not two.
So this is the thing that many people don't understand when they see these so-called scientific images in textbooks.
Right.
They look so, official and so on. But anyway, that's not all. We'll have to wait until we'll get back from a break to see even more. Okay, our subject this week is why the ape-man image, that classic ape-to-man image you see everywhere, is false. And the fact that it was known to be false when it was first made, and of course the point we're making at the end of the last segment is, people need to discern these things. When they see these images in books and so on, and they think, well, they wouldn't have just put it in here if it wasn't true. These are scientists, they must know all these things.
Oh, yes, they
Read
do.
some of the fine print, because you find out some interesting things. So,
and the history of the image, like we're talking about on today's show. It's a little hard to get maybe at some of that information.
Yeah.
But continuing on, in the list of errors in the original ape-to-man depiction, this image, another problem is that the size of the illustrations were greatly distorted. They show the first link in the progression as a very small animal with only two exceptions, Diopithecus and Solo Man. Yeah. And each progressive link is drawn larger and taller progressively, standing up straighter and straighter the more we move toward modern man. Now, this isn't because of fossil or other empirical data, but rather it's the result of artistic license that allows the artist to distort the picture to conform to evolutionary theory. That's where they were going with that.
And you can see here that they also become progressively less hairy,
right,
which is also clearly a result of artistic license and not fact. There's no method that exists that allows anthropologists to determine the amount of body hair for these, fossil bones, except modern humans, of course. And they were clothed in flesh and hair by the artist. Furthermore, Howell openly admitted that the first link, Pliopithecus, was not even considered to be an evolutionary link to humans in 1965 when the book was first published, but rather is now classified as an ancestor of the gibbon line. So they just threw that in, knowing full well it was false, filled up a gap in there.
And not only that, the second step, proconsul, even though it's drawn to look more like a modern human, the picture caption admits that proconsul is considered to be a very early ape, the ancestor of the chimpanzees and perhaps of the gorilla. Well, why include it then?
Well, to make it look like there's lots of evidence for evolution by making the diagram appear, robust and full. For Dryopithecus, the text acknowledges that the entire animal, although also appearing very human-like but stooped, is known only from a few jaws and teeth. And about the fourth step, Oreopithecus, the text actually states it's a likely side branch on man's family tree and not a human evolutionary ancestor. The text also notes that the next picture, Ramapithecus, is now thought by some experts to be the oldest of man's ancestors in a direct line.
Oreopithecus.
Oreopithecus.
Very good.
Pretty cool.
So then, the progression should have begun with Ramapithecus, but they needed filler. So soon after the Time Life book was published in 1965, Elwyn Simons of Yale found a more complete skull of Ramapithecus and convinced evolutionists that Ramapithecus had no part in human evolution. Yet, page 37 of the 1970 edition of the Time Life book, Early Man, shows a broken palate that included Ramapithecus in both the first step in the human evolution, jaw evolution parade, and in the human evolution parade. These pictures should have been revised in the new edition to reflect Simon's findings, but they weren't.
But they weren't. And also, Solo Man on the chart there was known only by 2 shin bones and some fragments of skull. So pretty sketchy to be shown so factually. And today it and Robustus are now interpreted as an evolutionary dead end in man's ancestry. Also of note is the fact that from Africanus to modern man, the bodies look remarkably similar, only the heads, most of which seem kind of out of place if you look at the pictures there on the bodies. Yeah. They're very different. They're more ape-like as we move backwards in time away from modern humans.
Okay, now some people might argue that the text does openly point out many of the inaccuracies in the drawing, so it's not fraudulent. But then why include them?
Right.
Well, many casual readers would have just gotten the seemingly solid scientific impression, even if they just glanced at the pictures in the book. So this visual image has effectively sold the concept of human evolution, even though the book revealed that this parade was fictitious.
That's right. So we're going to look into this more when we come back in just one moment, and we'll see you then.
Did you know that animals have genetic switches? These are regulatory regions of DNA that control the genes. Scientists have noticed that dramatic things can happen when a genetic switch is mutated. For instance, a mutated genetic switch can dramatically alter the appearance of stickleback fish or generate a great variety of coat colors in animals. Veterinary researcher Dr. Gene Leitner has suggested that God may have created genetic switches to facilitate variation, the switches having been created with a propensity to mutate without negatively affecting other traits. Modifications to genetic switches are not examples of evolution in action, even though they are often spoken of in that manner. Indeed, these changes don't involve new information, new genes arising, and evolutionists cannot explain the existence of the genetic switches in the first place. The more we learn about the complexity of genomes, the more they point to a super intelligent master programmer.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Our subject this week is why the ape-to-man image you see everywhere is false.
Right. I mean, this ape-to-man image idea has been copied and updated throughout the years as evolutionists have tried to solidify their evidence for human evolution. National Geographic magazine produced one in November 1985 in a realistic set of well-done drawings you can see there on your screen.
Okay, however, rather than improving, this illustration in some ways is even less accurate. Beginning with Afarensis, the figures are not walking as they were in the Time Life book, but are shown as expert runners, progressively running faster and with more grace, with arms swinging as the parade the parade progresses toward the fully human variety there.
Right. Now the first heads in the progression are very ape-like. You know, the later heads look very negroid, and the last head and body is that of a tanned Caucasian. And so the major body differences are that the arms are comparatively shorter, and the body is progressively less hairy as the progression to modern humans moves forward. The text does admit that the artist speculated on skin tone and the amount of body hair and its texture, and that the relationships between the fossils pictured are still not fully understood.
Right. Now, one of the main but false implications of these drawings of our supposed evolution from ape-like ancestors called Pliopithecus, that looks a lot like a chimp, to modern humans, is that there is a very straightforward single line from ape to humans that's known. Several of the most prominent modern paleontologists, like Donald Johanson, Tim White, Richard Leakey, Colin Graves, Bernard Wood, for example, have drastically different ideas about how our family tree, human family tree, supposedly goes.
Right, and another important fact is that there's no evidence that any creature walked bent over as this progression shows.
Right.
When apes walk on all fours, they knuckle walk and only appear to be bent over when compared to humans. This is the reason it's been assumed that as our common ancestor with apes evolved into humans, their stoop became less pronounced. However, no evidence exists of a creature hovering between a two-legged and a four-legged stance as the progression shows.
Right. Now, in recent years, the parade itself has evolved due to recent fossil finds. More detailed study of the fossil record and DNA analysis, and fortunately, the new view refuting the parade is now being presented in some mass media publications.
Yeah, for example, a Newsweek article pictured the parade as the old view, and next to it showed the new view,
right.
A complex bush that is very different from the now famous progression. And some criticisms from an evolutionary standpoint are more blunt, concluding that the gradual progression from crouching to standing as shown in the series is almost certainly wrong.
Okay, now even if not presented exactly like the modern diagram, the progression of apes to humans has been a common theme in evolutionary literature since about 1870, usually with obvious racist implications.
Absolutely. The earliest evolutionary progression drawings usually showed evolution from the most primitive to the most advanced animals, starting with an amoeba, then a fish, then to a bird, then a lizard, a monkey, an African,
right.
or some other primitive human. And if there was a modern human depicted there, in the last picture, it's a Caucasian.
Yeah, some examples of the evolutionary progression shows only the head profiles. Common illustrations were an evolutionary progression from supposedly the most primitive human, typically an Aborigine or an African, to the most advanced human, a Caucasian, often appearing Nordic or Scandinavian, that type of look. Examples showing profiles that stress the change in the facial angle from horizontal to vertical were common. Africans are shown as being the most primitive, and the Nordic-looking men as being the most advanced.
Yeah, and even modern illustrations show evidence of this racism. For example, many show the figures less hairy and the skin color getting lighter as evolution progresses. Now, the progression is widely recognized as a gross distortion by academics, but it keeps being perpetuated amongst the layperson.
Yeah, how is that even allowed in textbooks in our politically correct society today? Mm-hmm. How is that even allowed? Amazing. What's the conclusion here? Yeah. Well, Martin Lubenow states the parade is raw propaganda, brilliant propaganda, but raw nonetheless. And this propaganda has no doubt influenced millions of people to accept the Darwinian worldview of human evolution, and is by far the most popular icon of evolution that has ever been presented anywhere in the media for decades.
Right. And the fact is that the once popular fresco showing a single file of marching hominids becoming even ever more vertical, tall and hairless and pale is absolute fiction, and informed evolutionists agree. And we'll be back.
The reason that the Creation Answers book is so popular is because it covers a huge range of topics and answers more than 60 of the most asked questions about Genesis and the creation evolution issue. Questions like, what is the evidence for God's existence? Could the days in Genesis 1 be long periods of time? How did all the animals fit on Noah's Ark? Does radioisotope dating prove that the Earth is very old? Where do dinosaurs fit into the Bible? And many more. To order your copy, visit creation.com.
Okay, welcome back. We're going to wrap up this week's show with a news article. Mm-hmm. Well, what's going on? There's always something happening regarding creation evolution. So this is, the title of the article is Study Finds Aging Starts Before Birth. Mm-hmm. Amazing. So you age in your first 9 months. A new study, I'll just read the article, or we'll read it here. A new study has found that aging may begin even before we are born in the womb. The University of Cambridge-led team made this determination by exposing rats to situations similar to those faced by pregnant women. They then examined the protective ends of chromosomes called telomeres, which deteriorate with age. To simulate a reduction in oxygen available to the fetal body due to a high altitude or smoking mother, researchers placed gestating rats in an environment with 7% less oxygen. So far, that's what it says so far.
Right, and of course, we know babies age when they're in the room, but what they're actually talking about here is aging in the sense of degenerating, right? Now that's what we're getting.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and they continued, once these babies were born, they were found to have the aging indicators of shorter telomeres and more blood vessel problems, which exposed them to an earlier risk of heart disease. Both groups of infants, with and without standard oxygen levels, benefited when the mother was given antioxidant supplements while pregnant. Health habits during gestation also help to positively influence the child's future heart health. So, just a kind of an interesting article here showing that, basically, what we know with science, what it shows now is that basically we're programmed to die in a sense.
We're programmed to die. It's mutations. Mutations is what God uses to kill us. If you want to think of it in a morbid sense, yeah. Well, God's got to get us to heaven somehow, and He's got a number of variety of ways to do that. So mutations, and it's just interesting. The mutational degradation starts the very first time. Well, John Sanford, we did a show with some of his research there showing how humans are heading for extinction because of mutations at a phenomenal rate. Some of these mutations that accumulate in individuals are passed on to the next generation, so that every new generation of humans starts life off with more mutations than the previous generation.
Right.
And you can see that episode here at this link.
That's right.
But
so far from the evolutionary concept that we're getting better and better and better over time.
Because of mutations.
Because of mutations, what the show actually revealed is that we're getting worse and worse and worse over time, because that's why everybody dies. Here they're talking about the fact that you start aging, before you're actually born. Well, the reason everybody's going to die, as we mentioned, is because of mutations. You've got about 60,000 new mutations in your body after you're 40 years old. That's why you're going to get wrinkly and saggy, and you're eventually going to die. And that's what the Scripture says, that the wages of sin is death.
Yeah.
We all know that we're sinners. We all know that we're going to die, and mutations are going to get rid of us. So. The
average cell in a 15-year-old has 6,000 mutations. Your average cell, some more, some less. The average skin cell in a 60-year-old has 40,000 mutations.
Yeah.
No amount of oil of delay is going to stop that, or you're not going to fix that. It's mutations that are driving us, your skin and all of your vital organs. Same thing's happening there. It's mutations that drive us to death, and it was just an interesting study. Get more of this information by looking at a free digital copy of Creation Magazine. Go to creation.com/freemag. And next week, we're going to look at the flat earth myth and the Bible. We'll see you next week.